Hi, what's going on? My name is Anant, and in this video, we will continue our series on API and we will understand how developers built API to use it for themselves. Because APIs were never built for non-developers, and now that we as a non-developer want to understand API and use it for ourselves, we have to understand how did developers built it for themselves and how do they use it on their development activities. So the same exact thing where we left last time is, you were making an API call from the user interface. This is you, and you were making an API call from the user interface to a web application. This is web app. Now, how do you do this? You make an API call, pass on some information, which is this one, which is the context, and then in return you get something, right? You get the information back, and that's how it worked. Now if you want to understand what I did here, watch my previous video, because in that video I explain how the entire workflow works, right? So you made a API call here and you passed on some data. Right? And you were able to make the web application work, process the information, perform whatever operation which was needed, and get back the information. Now the example that I gave in the last video is that if you, let's say, were going to subscribe to this YouTube channel, right? So when you click on the button subscribe, because you're watching this from your phone or from your desktop, when you click on the button subscribe, what happens is this UI, whenever you click on this button, the UI make an API call, right, to this server, to YouTube server, right? And it tells YouTube that, hey, XYZ, which could be your name, has requested to subscribe to Anant's channel. So what exactly is the information it is sending? One is information about the person who subscribed to the channel and whom exactly are you subscribing to, right? So all of that information goes over here, and that's what we called as payload information, right? That's the information. Now anyone can go ahead and make that API call and make you subscribe to my channel. How do we protect this? That's only possible through a password, right? In the simplest word, it's only possible through password. But developers created their own terms that they call as API key, or in the other languages you might hear it as authorization token. These are nothing but the password, right? So they had their different way of authenticating each and every request, for which they started calling it API key or auth token or any of these, anything that says authorization or key, that's nothing but the password. But yes, this is not your YouTube password, because for these guys there is a different way. There's a more secured and encrypted way to authenticate each and everything. So while you use your password to log into YouTube, they are using something else which is more secured, more encrypted, to make each and every API call. I hope I was able to simplify this for you. If you did like this, make sure you like and comment, because that is going to motivate me to continue this entire series. And you subscribe to the channel, and let's get back to the topic. So like we understood over here is that every time you make an API call, you pass on the data and you make an API call. So this is what? This is your API call, right? This is your API call. So now we are going to get inside the developer's language. what exactly do we need to make an API call? We will just write down these terms and I will simplify this for you. Okay, so let's just get into that, because as they say, eat that frog, and this is the most difficult part of the entire learning, and I want to make sure that we learn that in the beginning itself, so that everything after this is going to be super super simple. So I want you to pay as much attention as possible to this. If you were like watching this from the side of your other desktop, just focus on what I'm going to teach you right now. So I'm going to teach you the components of API, because this is exactly what you need to make an API call, right? So API is broken down in following uh, terms. Number one is endpoint. If you want, you can take a screenshot of this as well. So the number one thing is endpoint. Now, how does that endpoint look like? I'm going to give an example side by side. So if you see over here, we let's say wanted to fetch, let's see. Let's take a really good example so that you can understand it better. So let's say this is an API, right? Let's just see this clearly. This is an API, right? You know what? I'm gonna take a screenshot of it so that I can use it inside Canva to better explain it. Yep, so let's see if we can draw on top of this. So this is your, okay, yeah, we can. Okay, so this is your API, right? The entire thing that you see right now, the whole thing, right? This whole thing is your API, right? Now, if we just have to find the endpoint, that is nothing but whatever comes after this slash. This is your endpoint, because that is why the name, endpoint, it comes at the end, because that's why it's endpoint. So an API always have an endpoint which suggests the action that we are performing. So if you see over here, the action that we are performing is a search action, right? So that's why it's search. But a lot of developers, they tend to use overcomplicated language for the endpoint. For some reason, maybe they want to keep it secure, or maybe they don't want to share it with everyone, or maybe because they're using themselves. They built the platform, they know the exact endpoint, so they kind of kept it gibberish for rest of the world. But every good developer make an API endpoint readable for you, right? And it's easily readable, easily understandable. So here you see it says search, right? So our endpoint here is search, which means this is the operation that we are performing. But it could have been another operation. Let's say instead of search, it could have been, let's say, create, right? That also is an endpoint. Now also remember this, the endpoint is not just this thing which comes after the forward slash. The endpoint can also look like this. The endpoint can look like this: search slash city. So endpoint can have multiple slash, but what I meant is whatever comes after this is your endpoint. So this thing is your endpoint, and whatever comes before this question mark, right? So whatever comes after this base URL, by the way, this is called as base URL, and then this before this question mark, that is known as query parameters. We'll get into this, do not feel overwhelmed. So let's just come back to what we were discussing. What we just saw right now is the first component of API, which is API endpoint. So let's just put it just beside it, right? And if you want, you can always take a screenshot so that you can always refer to these things later on, right? Now, APIs, since I mentioned endpoint, it would be unfair if I don't mention the term base URL. And base URL is pretty much always constant. It never changes. So if you see over here, the base URL was this part was the base URL, and that's why the name base URL, right, which we are always and always going to repeat. That's the base, right? And whatever comes after that is the endpoint. So the first component, I hope you understand, is base URL followed by endpoint. And when you combine the base URL with endpoint, it is your API endpoint, right? So both of these combined, and that's exactly the URL that we are going to make an API call, right? So these has to be combined. They always has to be like combined together to make a successful API call. And that's what you see over here, right? So this was the base URL and this was the endpoint. So when the base URL got combined with the endpoint, we got our successful API, right? Now, after the base URL and the endpoint, the next most important thing is your authorization token, API key, whatever you want to call it. So I'm just going to keep it simple and I will call it as API key, because that you will hear very common if you're talking to someone coming from the development background, right? But it is also known in many different ways, many different names. It's known as API key, authorization token, and lots of other names, right? Why other names? Why there are so many names? Because now again, this is because developers decided that there should not be only a single way to authenticate a request. There can be multiple ways to authenticate a request, right? Now let's just understand this, right? Like, let's say you have your own house. You have a house, right? Now some of you like to unlock this using a key, right? But some of you do not like it the traditional way. You wanted to use your fingerprint, right? And some of you wanted to use your NFC ring. So these are what? These are nothing but different ways to authenticate to get inside of your house. That's exactly what they did. So why do you have to complicate this? Developers decided that there should be different ways to authenticate an API call just for the sake of their own convenience, right? For some of them, one authorization method was easy, so they used that, and for some of them, the other one was making more sense, so they went ahead with that. Now, it's just not because of the convenience, it's also because of some security reasons. Some wanted to keep it more secure, some wanted to keep it more convenient. So depending on those factors, developers decided, hey, there's not going to be a single way to authorize. There can be multiple ways to authorize. But if somebody is building a web application, like you're building your own home, you decide how do you want the person to allow to enter in your house. So if you never had a way to unlock your home by a fingerprint, nobody will be able to do that. So what do they need to do? They need to follow your instruction and get your keys to unlock your house, right? That's exactly what you need to do with developers as well. Developers, when they build an app and they make a documentation on their API, they will always tell you, right? So you don't have to worry about this, because they will tell you themselves that what is the method or what is the way to authenticate inside their application. There are, like I said, there are multiple ways through which application can be authorized, and I'm going to name some of them, but please do not get overwhelmed with that. I am just sharing this because you should know that these are the type of authorization that exist, but it doesn't really matter. So one of the authorization is called as basic authorization. One another authorization is called as bearer token. Some developers also like to authorize it through JWT token. Again, please don't get into the technicalities of it. It's as simple as understanding how you're using a key or you're using a fingerprint, right? Then there is OAuth, and there are multiple ways through which an application can be authorized. So you just understand, right, that these are the components of getting authorized inside an application. One is base URL, endpoint, and API key. Okay, so you got everything that you needed to enter inside the house, right? And you were able to successfully enter inside the house because you had the address of the house, and this is exactly what which is giving you the address of the house. In fact, not just address, this base URL was your address. Let me just simplify this for you. So this base URL was the address of the house, but this endpoint is the exact room that you need to get inside to perform that action, right? So base URL was the address and room. So you need to know both of these things. You need to know exact address, and then inside of the address, which room, which flat, which exact place do I have to be, right? So base URL plus endpoint combined is the exact address, and then to unlock the the house, you needed a API key. Depending on which kind of authorization does that house support, right? So there can be basic auth, bearer token, JWT, OAuth, and there can be many more. So you don't have to get into the technicalities of that. So we understood 3 ways. Now the last thing which is left is the information, because we have everything now to get inside the house, but what exactly do we need to do, and what are the information to perform that action? That we don't have it yet, and that is only possible through the data, right? So here the last thing that we pass is data. Now the data has always evolved. Like when the technology was built, it was sent in a different way. Earlier developers used to use something called as XML. Please don't get into the technicality of it. Just understand that earlier the way developers used to pass information was through XML. Now it is outdated. Not many developers are using it, and they use something called as, so I'm just going to name 2 popular ways to pass on the data. Okay, number 1 is, can you guess? Query parameters. Query parameters. And let's just take an example of it. So if I go to this API call, right, and let me just take a screenshot again so that I can show it to you and explain it really well. Okay, let me just take it. Oops. Let's just take it here. Let's just expand it, right? Okay, so your query parameter is this. So this is your key. In your query parameter, this is your key, and this is your value, right? So when we are searching for university, let's see what exactly was the API call, right? This API call was to search for the university's list. So if we want to fetch the university list, we want to specify the country, right? But we could have also searched it not just by country, but maybe by city, right? So that's exactly where telling that, hey, I want to search for the universities, but I want to search by the country. And that's your key. Search by what? Perform the action by what? Right? That's exactly is your key. So I want to search by country, not the city. And who is deciding that what key that you can pass? These are nothing but the developers, right? Developers decided that if somebody wanted to search universities using my web application, they can search it by country or they can search it by city, right? They just created only two options and you only have two options. Let's say they only created one option, which is by country, so you can only do by country. So it is the developer who decided that you can fetch information only by country, and then you also have to pass the exact country which we are passing over here. So this, anything that comes after question mark is your query parameter. And you know what? This query parameter can also be extended. Like right now you saw the question mark had only one key and value, but in most cases that is extended with a few more question mark, a few more key and value pair. Let's just see. You see this API call. So this API call has two key and value. One key is drill downs, which is nation, and then another key is measures equals population. So there are times when just one key and value is not sufficient because you wanted to provide more information, right? Let's say we were searching for only the females, right? So, or you can say we were searching for only the schools, right? So in the university we are saying, okay, we want to search for university in United States, but we want only the schools. So we have to also add a type and we have to put it as school. I hope you're able to understand it, right? So the very first way to pass on the data to the API call is like using query parameter, which is the simplest way to pass on the data. And the other way to pass on the data is through something called as JSON. Now earlier we used to use something called as XML, but today one of the most popular language that is used by developers is JSON. And I'll show you an example of JSON. How exactly does a JSON look like? Now it's not very difficult to understand because it's very similar to the key and value pair, right? You see here we were passing key and value on the question mark over there. That's exactly what we are doing here, but in a different way. So how do we do this? How do we pass on the information in JSON? We're going to open a curly bracket and we're going to close the bracket. So that's the first thing you need to do, right? That's the format of a JSON. And then you have to give the first key. The first key, it could be, let's say, we were doing country, right? So let's say the first key is country, and you close this and then you put a colon and then you name whatever country it is. Let's say it's US. That's it. That's your key value. That's key. So this is your key and this is your value. Now if you wanted to pass on more data, right, I could have let's say first of all I need to put a comma if you want to add more information. So now I want to add information, let's say type, like I said, type, and then here I'm going to pass, let's say, school. We are only searching for school, right? So we passed two key value pairs right now. But can you tell me that if we already had this, which is the simplest way to pass on the data, why we went ahead with something like this? Why did we, invent JSON to pass on the data when we could have done everything through the, query parameters itself? Now, I want you to answer me in the chat, in the YouTube comment. Why did we do that? Go and research about this, because the next topic is going to be JSON, because JSON is not as simple as you think, right? It is very simple, but it's used very widely. So understanding the syntax of JSON is super important. I've shown you the basic, the simplest form of JSON, which looks like this. Open a curly bracket, close it, and then inside of the curly braces, you put the key value pair like this. This is key and value. And then you can put a comma and put another key value pair. That is your JSON. But can you tell me why we had to use JSON when we already had a key value pair? Drop it in the comment, right? And I want you to do some research, because that's your homework. I know you will go ahead and find that out on the next video, but if you do not research on your own, I mean, I'm going to still teach you. So I still suggest you and encourage you to do some research on your own and then watch the next video. Alright, and make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you have any question, you can connect with me on Instagram. I'm going to put my link to Instagram as well, and tell me what exactly are you building, right? If you're a marketing or a sales professional, you will find my Instagram handle. That's it for today. I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.